Tensions are growing between Kosovo and Serbia. The last events are with the arrest of the 3 Kosovo special forces, which Pristina claims that they were kidnapped. Who is right, and will an international investigation be opened?
KFOR has requested both parties to submit their evidence proving their claims, and on the basis of this evidence and the evidence that NATO has in their position, I think they will be able to come up with a position about what exactly happens. But we really need de-escalation instead of escalation. That's very clear.
The government in Pristina has decided to ban the entry of all goods from Serbia, also the cars with the plates from Serbian plates. And what is your position? What this mean actually?
Well, we have seen the announcement, but we have not seen any formal decision from the government of Kosovo yet. So we requested on what basis this decision was made, if it was made, and of course Kosovo is bound by a number of commitments, being part of CEFTA, having the Stabilization Association Agreement, past dialogue agreements, including the agreements on freedom of movement. So all these commitments must be respected. That's why we are expecting the clarification from the government of Kosovo.
Mr. Lajcak, you had a lot of meetings in Kosovo and in Serbia, again in Kosovo and in Serbia, but how will you convince Albin Kurti for new elections in the north of Kosovo, and are the elected mayors legal?
Albin Kurti is not questioning the need to have early elections, but the difference between his position and our position is that we believe that the elections need to be held as soon as possible, and prior to this we need to de-escalate the situation. That means to get the people off the street, and for this to happen, government of Kosovo has been requested by the European Union, by the United States, by other partners to make sure that the mayors will operate from different locations other than official municipal buildings. And the elections were legal, and the mayors were elected in a legal way, but legality is different from legitimacy or representativeness. Of course, it's impossible to call the elections representative when you had a participation of 3.4% and practically 0% from the majority population. So that's why European Union in its first statement after the election said that these elections do not give answers to the questions we are facing, and therefore we need a political solution. And the political solution can only be achieved through new elections with the participation of Kosovo Serbs.
How you will restore the dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina? Where is concrete the political solution between them?
Well, European Union made it very clear how we see the way forward. Step number one, de-escalation. That means really to allow people to return to their normal lives and to remove or allow them to leave the streets together with or simultaneously with the Kosovo Special Police and KFOR. Upon the conditions that the mayors, as I said, will agree to operate from different premises. Point number two, early elections with the participation of Kosovo Serbs. And point number three, but in parallel, return to the dialogue, return to the normalization, and beginning of the serious work on the association / community of Serb majority municipalities.
What did you say to Albin Kurti about his 5 points plan?
High Representative Borrell responded in his letter, and that is a comprehensive answer. So the most important element is that there is no de-escalation in the 5 points plan of Prime Minister Kurti, and we believe that de-escalation is the point number one. There are elements that can be discussed, and we obviously agree with the need to establish rule of law and the conditions for free and fair elections. No one questions that. But again, you cannot do this in the situation where there are people out in the streets and there is a risk of escalation on a daily basis. So therefore, we really need to start with the escalation.
Is it true that Brussels plans with the measures that they were mentioned, that there will be isolation of Pristina on high-level events, one of the measures. I'm asking you this because, in other hand, Albania already put back from the intergovernmental session that they were planning to do with Kosovo.
Well, European Union announced certain measures of political and financial nature because European Union feels that it has to react to the fact that so far there have been no signals from the government of Kosovo of accepting the proposal submitted by the European Union and the United States. So these measures, as the spokesperson has said very clearly, they are already in place, but they will be recalled as soon as we are back to the normalization track.
Mr. Lajcak, if the situation escalates, can it spill all over the region, and how?
Yes and no.
I'm asking you because those are the fears that the countries around there.
The atmosphere, of course, spillovers, because people don't feel comfortable when they see tensions, violence, escalation. Not in the physical sense. This is clearly between Kosovo and Serbia, and it will not have any effect on North Macedonia or other countries. But the atmosphere is very important. We want, of course, to have an atmosphere of cooperation, collaboration, focusing on normalization of relations between Kosovo and Serbia, focusing on European integration. Instead, we are busy again with the crisis management. So that's not good for the region. So there is no risk of spillover in a physical sense, but of course politically, mentally, psychologically, it already has a negative impact on the rest of the region.
My last question is domestic question about our situation here in Macedonia, now North Macedonia. We are in a debate for changing the constitution. What will happen, and if we don't start the negotiations now? What kind of impact we will have?
I don't want to enter into discussion which is based on what if. Yes. I am an optimist. I believe that it will happen. I believe that your country will do what is expected to do. Your country has done this many times in the past. It is very much appreciated by the European Union and the wider international community. And I really trust your government, your Prime Minister, your leaders, that they will find a way how to meet this requirement, which I really expect them to wide open the path towards European Union.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ambassador, the situation in Kosovo is tense. EU and United States are calling for de-escalation of the situation, but how it will be implemented?
So it is very tense, and we have said unequivocally that we need the immediate unconditional return of the 3 Kosovo police officers who have been taken to Serbia. But we also need both sides to de-escalate, and so we have supported the EU's 3-point plan for de-escalation, and we will stand by it and insist that both sides take this situation to a cooler level where we can make progress instead of talking about incidents that crop up again and again.
Does the new situation in which Albin Kurti refuses to implement some of what US demands can put a shadow on bilateral issues?
Look, the path forward is not easy. It requires action from both sides. And we are pleased to see that on the Serbian side there is some demobilization of the military, which is one of the things that needs to happen, but it's not enough. There also needs to be, as I say, the return of those Kosovo police officers back to Kosovo. But yes, we are counting on our Kosovar partners as well to take action to recall the mayors to another location from which they can work. They are democratically elected officials, but they should work from a different location so that we can cool the situation down, and then we can have another set of elections, hopefully with fuller participation, so we can get back into a democratic process and then work on the steps in the dialogue that would see the normalization of relations between the two sides. It is very important that we move quickly to get back on that track, because unfortunately when we don't, we see what happens, things move in the opposite direction.
Yes. Can we expect for Washington to undertake new sanctions to Pristina?
Look, I'm not going to preview any future steps. Our preference, our strong preference, is to work with the two sides to get back on track, to support the EU's three-point plan, and to get to a place where we are talking about the implementation of an association of Serb municipalities and the other elements of the basic agreement that was worked out here in Ohrid to normalize relations between Serbia and Kosovo.
There were new statements and messages from Moscow. They said that the rhetoric of Kosovo will threaten the territorial integrity of North Macedonia and the others. How do you comment this?
Look, Russia has engaged in a variety of information operations across the Western Balkan space that has frankly not been conducive to promoting stability and security in the way that we see it as like-minded states. Russia has its own agenda for the region, which is to maximize their influence. It is often at cross purposes with other countries in the region. I mean, look at what Russia is doing in Ukraine. They are not a credible partner right now on any security matter.
North Macedonia now faces with the political crisis. We need to change the constitution to continue the negotiation process with European Union. What kind of risks will be happen in future if we won't change the constitution in the next period?
Well, look, the United States has long supported North Macedonia in its Euro-Atlantic trajectory. And I am proud to have been part of the process that resulted in your NATO accession. That was a huge milestone. Now we want to see the other half of that critical piece of a Europe whole, free, and at peace realized, which is European Union membership. And there are some difficult conditions that are being put on North Macedonia, and we recognize that. We are frank. We would like to see this process move ahead as quickly as possible because we believe it's in the interest of the people who live here to be in the European Union, to have some of those privileges, but also responsibilities. I think it will make the country more integrated into the Western Balkans, certainly more integrated with Europe. But yes, there are challenges.
The last messages actually from the last visit, official visit from the Senator Murphy, he said that if we won't change the constitution in the next period, it will affect on the relations between official Washington and Skopje. What does it mean, actually, this?
Look, we have a very strong...
Because some of the people here actually meant that it's a threat. So.
Look, I'll let Senator Murphy's words speak for themselves, and he can address what he meant. Yeah. What I will tell you is that we have a very strong bilateral relationship, and certainly we value everything that North Macedonia is doing to bring stability to the region, including their chairpersonship of the OSCE, which is critically important. And we believe that there is a political path forward. It is not going to be easy, however. And so we are speaking to various different political forces and encouraging a path forward, recognizing that, look, you've been asked to do a lot of difficult things over the years, including changing the name of your country. But ultimately, when we look back on some of those very difficult concessions or agreements that were made, like the Prespa agreement, one looks back and one sees that this did in fact open up a new pathway for the country. It did allow you to join NATO, and we see a similar pathway now, albeit with similar challenges.
The latest polls show that the most popular politician in the country is Vladimir Putin. Do you think maybe perhaps that this actually uses Russia in their favor and the situation in the region and in the country?
Well, honestly, I hadn't seen that. I don't understand how a leader who is presiding over a war of aggression that has resulted in countless mass atrocities, war crimes, and frankly, crimes against humanity is seen as popular anywhere. I understand that propaganda and disinformation play a role in this, yes. And that is certainly the case. But individuals need to make informed judgments by looking at the facts of what is happening on the ground. And right now, there is one country led by one person that is waging a war of choice. This is not a war that was necessitated by anything. This was a war of choice that was launched against a peaceful neighbor for no reason other than imperial subjugation. And so we have to acknowledge that.
How does the US prevent this kind of influence in the region and with the disinformation process and everything?
It is challenging. There are a number of things that need to happen in order to be able to combat this type of disinformation, including programs on media literacy, alternative sources of information, pluralistic media, but then also, frankly, an informed public that is able to distinguish between some of this propaganda that is being spread on social media, for example, and in other venues, and facts. And when we have clear understanding of what constitutes facts and what constitutes disinformation, as we have, for example, in many of the frontline states that are closer to Russia, like Finland or Estonia or Latvia or Lithuania or Poland, they understand when they see Russian propaganda and they discount it and it doesn't really have an effect. But in other places, there's more nefarious ways of spreading this propaganda. And unfortunately, sometimes it works.
When we are here actually with the Russian influence, we are going to the war in Ukraine. It was expected that it will be finished very soon, but the situation gets more and more tense. It's 1.5 years since the start of the war in Ukraine. How to act next?
Well, look, for the United States, it is very clear that we will continue to provide Ukraine with the assistance that it needs to defend itself against outside aggression. So we'll continue with the military and security assistance. We'll also continue with the humanitarian assistance, which is necessary given the huge numbers of internally displaced persons and refugees, those who are affected by the trauma of war, and then also macro-financial assistance to ensure that the country is on sound economic footing. But we see this as a critical moment in global history when one state, a nuclear power, a permanent member of the UN Security Council, has waged an unjustified, unconscionable war against its neighbor. Again, for no reason other than to subjugate it, to try to erase its identity, incorporate its territory. We cannot allow that to stand in the 21st century. This is not the sort of world that anyone, anywhere in the world should want to see. A world of might makes right. That's not the type of world that will enable for peaceful, stable, prosperous relations, whether it's here in the Western Balkans or in Latin America or in the Indo-Pacific. It is not conducive to peace and security.
We will return back to domestic issues. There is a political debate about the changing of the constitution. My last question is, what are your messages to the political actors in the country, especially to the opposition, about the changing of the constitution, because the opposition is the one who doesn't want to change now?
Look, I'm an American diplomat. It is not my role to tell a politician who represents their constituency what they should and shouldn't do. That said, we, the United States, see an opportunity now for North Macedonia to move forward with its European Union membership, which is a strategic goal of this country and has been a strategic goal for many different, various political actors here in this country. And so we think that this is an opportunity, and it should be seized, because we don't know when this opportunity will arise again. I fully recognize that the Macedonian people have been asked to do a lot of very difficult things over the course of the last decade, very difficult things, and that this is an issue that touches on people's identity and their sense of who they are. I understand that, and I sympathize, and I completely respect alternative views of this. But I also, geopolitically and strategically, I see this opportunity to cement the country as part of a Europe whole, free, and at peace. And for us, for the United States, we want to support you in that effort, however we can. It's for you to make this decision, for Macedonian politicians to make the decision, but we see this as an opportunity.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Ambassador, you are witness of the current political situation here. Are you optimist or pessimist about the changing of the constitution?
Well, of course, the changes to the constitution can pass, but that depends on the decisions taken by the members of parliament and the political parties. This is naturally a sovereign decision for the country to make, but I think there are some important elements that those who have that responsibility and the general public in general, I think, need to be aware. And the first, I would say, is a question of the broader context and the time. As you know, and you follow it closely, we are going through an extraordinary period of turmoil and change, and following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And what we've seen, one consequence of that, is an increasingly clear understanding of the importance of enlargement, including for the Western Balkans, not just in economic terms, but in terms of security, stability, and democracy. You will have followed the important speech given by President Macron in Bratislava recently, a similarly important speech by President of the European Commission, von der Leyen, all pointing in that direction. So we're in a moment of momentum, when there is a time that things can move forward rapidly. And the issue of enlargement is not just a national issue or even a party political issue, it's a national issue, it's even a European issue. Now for North Macedonia, as you know, we opened accession negotiations last July. These are progressing well in the sense that the screening process is advancing, and your teams are very much engaged and very professional and doing a good job. The next step requires the constitutional change, but to go to that step, there is no further decision that needs to be made by the EU, and there is no further veto for that next step. So the door is open, and the way to the next step really depends on that sovereign choice. Last of all, I understand the public debate, which has been very broad and very general and sometimes quite passionate, but it's very important to look down on what the constitutional changes are themselves, and once they're published, what is actually being asked. We know that this will be the inclusion of people who self-identify as Bulgarian within the constitution, and we have to ask ourselves, look, this country already has a good record in inter-ethnic relations. This change would consolidate that, and there are many other countries across the European Union and beyond which, like this, are a multicultural society in which many different groups. That doesn't undermine the sovereignty or the national interest of the country. So I think, on all of these issues, we're in a time of momentum. Momentum is something which is very valuable in politics. It's very valuable in international relations, and I think it's now the moment to seize that opportunity.
Opposition said actually they want a delayed action of the constitutional changes. Brussels said that it's not possible. You referred actually to the conclusions of July 2022, but can new conclusions be obtained? How realistic is this request of Mickoski?
I mean, I think to be very clear, it's not realistic to expect either a new agreement with Bulgaria or new council conclusions. I followed the process, as you can imagine, extremely closely, the negotiations that took place over a course of nearly 2 years. They were very difficult. And in the end, a compromise was reached, which was, I believe, the best agreement that could be reached in the circumstance. No compromise is perfect for everyone. By nature, it involves a compromise. But it allowed this country to move forward on its accession path, to open accession negotiations. And that's very important.
The political gap can grow into a major political crisis. What are the risks if constitution won't be changed in the next period, or are postponed?
Yeah, I think, or are postponed, and that's also an important point. I think, first of all, as I said, there are a range of opportunities that exist now thanks to this momentum, thanks to this renewed and increased seriousness about enlargement, which means that this country would be on the train and moving forward decisively on its European path together with others. The risk there is, if this is postponed till after elections, that opportunity fades, and that the country is not able to move forward with the same speed and the same determination as others might be able to do. And of course, also, I'm concerned, to be very honest with you, at the risks of this issue becoming increasingly polarized, especially in the context of an election, when in fact this is a question which I think needs calm heads and a very clear vision of the bigger picture of the national interest, and indeed of the European interest in seeing this country join the European Union, because we want you in the European Union, because we believe that we and you are safer, more prosperous and more secure with the country in.
The opposition says that early elections will save the country from defeat. What do you think about this?
Well, I'm not going to comment on the different positions of the political
parties. Do you
parties.
agree with them?
Well, I'm not going to comment on the political positions of the different parties about elections. But you know, there is something which underlines this, which I think is important. What we've seen in the last 2 years, and we see at the moment in particular, is this very strong political polarization. And if you want to see the country moving forward to the European Union, and we've seen this in many other countries that have successfully completed that path, the parties need to come together on a platform of implementing EU reforms. Doesn't mean they have to go into a coalition together, that's a matter for them. They can always have their differences, that is normal and even healthy. But there needs to be agreement on these fundamental reforms and on the objective of getting to the European Union. Almost all the parties are agreed on that objective, but we don't see that translating in practice into them coming together on a common platform and making sure the necessary reforms really speed forward.
At this rate now, can we become a member state till 2030, the goal of the country?
It's a good question, and maybe starting with the second part, is 2030 possible? And that's indeed the question that's being asked here at this Prespa Dialogue Forum. That answer was given not by me, but by nobody less than the President of the European Council, Charles Michel, who said it's not mission impossible, on the contrary, it's mission possible. So it can be done. But you're right with the first part of your question, at this pace.
Yes.
In order for that to be achieved, there needs to be a remarkable speeding up of reform efforts. There needs to be that kind of consensus across the political divide that this is the national project to reach that goal, and that is the focus of everyone.
Apart from the constitutional changes there now at the moment, the messages for the country in the last period are that the business and political elites and the corruption is reign in the country. Does business prevail before Macedonian judiciary?
I think the issue of corruption and the problems in the rule of law are well known. They have existed for a long time, and any citizen that you talk to has had experience in one way or another of problems that have arisen from corruption. So there is corruption, it's very, very prevalent. Nonetheless, there has been progress in a number of areas in recent years to address some aspects of corruption and to improve on the rule of law. And you see some very good institutions carrying out important work, such as the State Commission for the Prevention of Corruption or the State Audit Authority. But the question that needs to be asked is this enough? And clearly not. There is a huge gap still to be covered, and there needs to be really serious and determined actions in all of these areas. That's partly because in the accession process itself, this issue is so important that we call it the fundamental, which means that your progress is assessed at every single step of the process itself, from day one until you join the European Union. But much more importantly than that, citizens expect to see improvements. They want to see improvements in all of these areas. They want to have a judiciary that they can trust. They want to know that if they're getting services, that they're not going to be asked to pay extra, a bribe or something similar, in order to get the services which they're entitled to. And we want to see that too, and that's why we're investing so much in trying to support this area.
What about the Judicial Council, especially when the two judges actually have resigned?
I mean, first of all, what does the Judicial Council do? It's a body, a bit like its sister, the Council for Prosecutors. Its job is to make sure to protect the independence, the professionalism and the integrity of the judiciary. That's why it's important, and that's why everyone is focusing what has been going on there recently. And it's extremely disappointing what we've seen. And as a result, the public clearly considers that this body has no credibility at all. So, given the crucial role played by this body, there needs to be decisive action to try and improve the situation, focusing on strengthening the independence of the body, dealing with responsibility, so that pressure from outside is dealt with directly, and also making sure that it acts at the highest levels of integrity. So it needs a huge amount. We need to see huge improvements in this area, which will translate into the judiciary more widely. And let's be clear, sometimes you hear people talking about the judiciary as if the whole thing is absolutely corrupt. There are no bright spots. There's nothing positive to say. That's not the case. There are many judges out there who are doing a professional job and who want to act in an independent manner to high standards of integrity. But we need bodies like the Judicial Council to act at the highest standards if we're really to start to see public confidence built up based on being sure that when they go to court, when the courts are operating, they're acting to the highest standards impartially and not on the basis of either political or financial interference.
North Macedonia now is waiting the reports from Brussels, from European Commission, from the cluster 1, especially chapters 23-24. What can we expect?
Yeah, I mean, so this, what you refer to as cluster 1 and chapters 23 and 24 is actually all part of this process of screening which started last September. And what basically happens is the experts from the European Commission, together with your civil servants, as well as others from civil society and different institutions, sit down and look through the laws and standards of the European Union in key areas. And this cluster 1, the famous cluster 1, is about these fundamentals, about the rule of law, about the fight against corruption, public administration reform. And on the basis of those extensive discussions, the European Commission then drafts a report which would then go to the Council. Now, I'm afraid the thing that I can't help you with, I can't comment on that yet because it's still being worked on. I haven't seen it. And
it will be soon? When can we expect
I think the work is continuing, and then it will go to the Council, and then they will have their own views on it, because the idea is then on the basis of those reports they can then establish what homework, what needs to be done in the country, very practically, not just in general terms, but very, very concretely what needs to happen in all these different areas.
Do you think that there should be changes to the law with which state money are returning to the media? Because 40% of the current media market will be covered with state money. Is this practice in EU?
Change to the media is a really delicate issue and needs to be approached with a lot of caution and care. The media has an absolutely vital role to play in a democratic society, and it's being challenged from all sorts of directions. And as we look forward, particularly with things like artificial intelligence, we know the challenges are only going to increase. At the same time, we have, of course, technological developments which create great opportunities. So when we're looking at reform in the media sector here in this country, we need to be thinking about, first of all, how can we make sure that the media sector is able to benefit from the opportunities that exist, and also how can you make sure it's resilient in the face of the risks that are there. These are problems also which exist in the European Union, so you're not alone in this. So any change that is made, such as the ones you've suggested, I mean, obviously at the beginning it's a political decision for the authorities to make. But what I would say is there are two important caveats here. First of all, any decision made needs to be made on the basis of consultation, thorough consultation, with all of the appropriate, the relevant interlocutors. And consultation means listening, taking into account the different views and the different concerns. And then any changes that are made need to be in line with the laws and standards of the European Union and with best practice there. So the answer to your question is any change in the media area needs to be approached carefully on the basis of consultation, but following the laws, standards and best practice in the European Union.
Yes, you said cautious, so that means that in this kind of conditions the changes should not be made at any cost, right?
I mean, no changes to law should be made at any cost. They should always be careful reflection, bearing the importance of the media sector, consultation, and then because you are a country, you are now what we call a negotiating country, also very important, crucial, that you advance on your European path, which means following the laws, standards and best practice. After all, actually that will produce the best media environment and will ensure that environment, the media is ready to go forward in the future in a very resilient way.
My last question is, 7 EU countries had an initiative, came up with an initiative to change the voting in the European Union, not with consensus like now, but with qualified majority. How realistic is this to happen, and will Macedonia avoid the Bulgarian veto in future?
So 2 questions there.
Yes.
The first one about changes within the European Union itself. So you started out with 6 member states, we're now at 27. And the world of the 1950s, when we were 6 member states, and the world of 2020s is totally different, as you know. And so during that time you have seen lots of changes in the organization itself, in terms of its functioning, in terms of democracy. And those changes, of course, are going to continue in the future. Now, whether or not it's about qualified majority voting, whether it's about number of commissioners, all the different debates which regularly come up, that's a matter for the member states, the council itself, to decide. But you will certainly see changes because the union needs to continue to be flexible, it needs to be more nimble in order to meet the challenges that are ahead and that we're facing already. And those discussions will be determined. What I can say, though, is that those discussions do not need to slow down the accession process, because obviously they happen in parallel. On the question of vetoes, because it's a question people often ask me, and it's a legitimate one. In the enlargement process, there are many different points at which a veto could be put down by one of the 27 member states. Perhaps because the rule of law is not advancing like it should, perhaps because you're not addressing environmental questions. So it can be on many different reforms. But the important thing here, and this is where we in the European Union have a responsibility, is to make sure that as you move forward, any veto is exercised related to the reforms that you are supposed to put in place and not other extraneous, sometimes bilateral issues as well. And that I think, from the experience that we've seen in other countries that have moved forward in this way, is that those kind of concerns, bilateral concerns, tend to fade away as the country moves forward on its in its reform path. That's not to say it's not very tough, because there are some difficult decisions on reforms which need to be made and which other countries have made in the past, and you will need to make on your way to joining us and becoming a member of the European Union.
Ambassador, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.